Now, my story is not unique. There's thousands of professionals of color who have experiences like mine.
A Black executive perspective.
Whether you're aware of it or not, it's a topic that is often avoided.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor, and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black executive perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, Tony Tidbit, and I'm here with our co-host, Chris P. Reed. So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is a question that we get a lot, not at the same time, but just in different aspects of our lives, of our travels. And that question usually comes from our white brothers and sisters. And they would say, Tony, why does the Black community have an adversarial relationship with the police? Chris, why do I hear about mothers and fathers sitting down with their children and talking about the police? We don't understand that. You know, the police is your friend. The police are there to protect you. We don't understand. And we get that, right? So what we want to do today is we want to sit down and talk about the relationship between the African-American community, people of color, and the police, how it started, and why there is an adversarial relationship. And then more importantly, how it can be solved. Now, as we dive into this topic, we want to make something clear right off the bat. Number one, Chris and I have friends of ours, they're family members that are police officers. They've been police officers. They go out and they put their life on the line to protect us. They take risks for their families to protect us. So our conversation today, it's not about knocking individual police officers or anybody that goes out and tries to protect the citizens in their community. What we're going to talk about today, and what we're going to not just talk about, what we're going to share from a historic standpoint with facts, is the systemic issues in the police community, right? That has started from the beginning. And to be fair, the individuals, no matter how good they are, and no matter how they want to be able and do the right thing for their fellow citizens, it's beyond them and it was before them. And to be fair, the majority of them probably not even aware of what we're going to share today. And that's not a knock on them. And the reason I say that, I've been in the advertising industry for 30-something years. The majority of people in the advertising industry don't know when advertising started. They don't know the history of that, okay? And there's people in all different type of endeavors and industries that really don't know when it starts. So that's not a knock. Just to be clear, though, I do know when advertising started, right? But I didn't learn that my first day. I learned it later on. So we're going to dive in, but the key here is for us to educate everyone so we're all on the same page. All right, when we talk about systemic, what does that mean? Okay, and we're going to dive into it. And more importantly, when did these issues start and why do they continue to happen today? Chris?
You know, I think this is very important, very timely. It seems to always be a good time to talk about this, unfortunately, because repeated actions and things of that nature, and then just a way of life, right? But the real concept that we have going on here is the fact that this is bigger than just the police question. And I know we'll get into this at later times and through different lenses and avenues. But the criminal justice system as a whole is something we need to really educate and advocate for changes and reform and things of that nature. But I think what you're talking about today is going to be good because we're taking a small bite out of a big thing at this point in time. And we have to kind of stair step our way to the truth. And all we're here to do is resonate what we see as our truth. And as Tony often says, check it for yourself. Check multiple sources. Don't just take what we say as the gospel and leave it at that. make sure that you inform yourself and educate yourself if you really care. If you really want this game, go get some of it, from yourself. But we're going to give you the starter kit, right? So there's going to be, the historical starter kit of how this all began.
And I love what he said. And to be clear, historical starter kit. So typically when we talk about these issues, we're talking about them in the year 2023. And if we had to look at that in terms of the alphabet, right, we're talking about them at letter T or letter U, right? And then we're trying to solve stuff or understand stuff at letter T and letter U. But to be fair, you got to go all the way back to letter A, because when you understand from letter A, the beginning, then everything else makes sense. And then we can make changes at letter T, U, and V. Okay. So that's what we're going to do today. And back to Chris's point, we're just not going to dive into this and we think we're going to solve it right now. We're going to start at letter A, but we're going to come back and we're going to talk about all aspects all the way up to letter T, because it's so big. It's not just one part. So this is just an introductory in terms of the history, where it started. And then from there, we're going to dive into all the other aspects as well. So Chris, you ready to have this conversation, buddy?
Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about it, my man. Let's talk about it. So one of the things, let me ask you this question, Chris. We see this a lot. People bring it up. I've seen it on videos where individuals join the police force, or they're in the academy, or they're taking a test, and a verbal test, and they ask them, why do you want to be a police officer? And some people, I don't say all of them, some people say, I want to protect and serve my community. I want to protect and serve, or I want to serve and protect my community. Have you heard that before?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Right. So let me ask you this. So the majority of our citizens here, when they think of the police and they think of their slogan, they think of protect and serve, or serve and protect. It is on a lot of police cars across the country in a lot of different communities. Some that's not, so just to be fair, but it's in a lot. And when people think of the police, they think of protect and serve. Right. Okay. Is that correct, Chris?
It is. I mean, it's synonymous with the police. Like when I was a kid, a Xerox was synonymous with a copy, and a Q-tip is synonymous with a cotton swab. So, you know what I'm saying? We call them all Q-tips. We call them all Xeroxes. And we think all the police are there to protect and serve.
Exactly. Now, let me ask you this real quick. When you think of the word protect and serve, or the phrase, I should say, what does it mean to you?
I'm on a different angle of this. And so as I've gotten older and maybe been more jaded in my experiences, I assume that what the police that I've been exposed to thought protect and serve meant was to protect the interest of their boss and their boss's boss, and serve the interests of their boss and their boss's boss, because a lot of it doesn't seem to be communal in nature. Some of the things that go on, it's a lot of excuses and a lack of accountability from my perspective in that regard. So I think holistically and kind of fancifully, we want to think that everybody's looking out for the best interests of the people that are paying taxes and all that kind of stuff. But, in reality, it's not always been presented in that fashion. It's been presented as more of an maintain order type of situation, as opposed to a protection and a service.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that, buddy. So when I think of protect and serve, and to be fair, I'm no different than anybody else until I dove into this history we're about to share. I thought protect and serve means to protect the community from crime and from whatever, and then to serve the community, be an ambassador from the police department, right? Be there to be courteous, be there to be helpful, look out so crime doesn't have to be happening. You could be serving the community in a lot of ways, and, showing up at schools, PAL football leagues, baseball leagues, sponsoring those. So there's a lot of things in terms of when we talk about service. Okay. So to be fair, that's what I always thought, right? Now let's dive into the history though, because the reason we bring this up, the majority of people think that this slogan's been around since, Marshall Dillon on Gunsmoke was the sheriff, okay? And it hasn't, okay? So let's go into the history, all right? So In February 1955, the Los Angeles Police Department conducted a contest for a new motto for their police academy. To protect and serve became the official motto of the police academy, and it was kept constantly before the officers in training as an aim and purpose of their profession. With the passing of time, the motto received wider exposure and acceptance throughout the department. The slogan, "To protect and serve," became widely adopted by police forces across the country. However, there's a reason why I asked Chris, what does it mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
The phrase has never been defined. It means different things to different people. Okay? So, number one, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So we're going to start at letter A. And this ain't letter A. Okay? Protect and serve, that motto did not start back in, like I said, in the 1700s, so 1800s. It started in 1955 in the Los Angeles Police Department for a situation for their academy. Okay. And it's been adopted, but it's never really been defined. And the thing about it, in different communities, it means different things based on how the police act in that community. Okay. Chris just gave you a point of view where he said, to me, it means like they're protecting their bosses. Okay. And guess what? Based on where his community and what he has seen in his community, that's what people think, where other people think different things, right? And so we just want to make level set, because that's the first thing that comes up. Well, the police are here to are your friend. They're here to protect you, and they should be, just to be clear, okay? But that motto is not a motto that started off when the police. It was something that, to be honest, it's not even 70 years old, okay? Because it started in 1955, and we're in 2023. All right, so. And the thing about it, though, I will say this, because in my example, I thought, and I look for it to be protect the community and serve the community. But what we know is that it hasn't risen to that level in the Black community, in the people of color communities. And we're gonna dive in like to why. Why is that? Because to be fair, in other communities, they're doing exactly that. Hey, we're going to be service to the community. We're there. We're, hey, be careful. We over here with the football league. We're here because there's not a lot of crime going on. Yeah. So they're serving the community. And then so those constituents in that community, like, why people mad at them? All right. Why do they? I don't understand. Because and to be fair, you wouldn't understand, because from your vantage point, you see exactly what you expect that motto to be. Chris,
and let me say something about the power of reputation. When I was young, when I was a kid in the inner city, the actions that were represented by the police that I was exposed to exemplified the words on the car. So their actions, in my mind, aligned with, it can't be about me or it can't be about my folks, because the actions I'm seeing are not productive as it relates to my folks. As I've gotten older, as I've gotten out of the hood and gotten, did some things, made some moves in life. Now, when I drive into my subdivision and the police car is sitting there making sure people aren't speeding around the kids and the officer waves at me, I still get a funny feeling like, is he on something? Because what is he waving? Why is he waving? But then I realize he's waving at everybody. Like, my wife has to calm me down and say, no, we don't live like that no more. But the power of reputation, the power of that psychological influence of conditioning, and we're going to talk about conditioning as we go through this, that power of conditioning is hard to wash off. And so that's why you have to be careful. When you establish your reputation, it's hard to get people to change that sentiment, even when the factors around it change. And I've not seen any, in my adult life, probably in the last 15 years, I've not seen any reason to believe that the motto doesn't mean what you thought it meant.
Right.
But I still got a lot of childhood to unpack where it meant something different to me. And so I think that will be revealed as we talk more in depth about this today.
There's no question, buddy, and I'm glad you brought that up. There's no question. So we have PTSD. Okay, when it comes to the police department, and we're joking here. Okay, we're joking, but we're for real. We're being honest. and we don't even know. I mean, and so look, let's dive in and we'll come back to the PTSD part. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So now what we wanted to do here, because we wanted to set the stage with protect and serve. Okay. With that motto, protect the community, serve the community. All right. So let's jump. We're going to jump to letter T. In an unfortunate situation that happened last year with Tyree Nichols, okay? And just so we set the stage, Tyree Nichols was a black individual that lived in Memphis, Tennessee, was at a stoplight and something happened, okay? And the thing that happened to him, it ended his life. He ended up losing his life by the hands of the police. All right. And let's kick this off by starting off with Tyree Nichols.
Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out the fucking car. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your ass around. All right. On the ground. You don't do that, okay? Get on the fucking ground. Get on the ground. Okay. Raise your ass. All right, I'm on the ground. Lay down. Yes, sir. Get down. Please get on the ground. I'm going to tase you. Get on the ground. Lay down. One. Now. I tase him. All right. Okay. All right. Break your shit. Okay, dude. Damn. Turn the fuck around. Put your fucking hands on your back. Bitch, put your hands behind your back. Quick. Okay, stop. I'm gonna knock your ass the fuck out. You guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down. I'm just trying to go home. Lay down. Man, if you don't lay down, I am on the ground. Put your hands on your stomach. I got you. Okay. Get the fuck back. Stop. I'm not doing it.
So again, that may sound, and if you listen, obviously this has been over a year now. That was horrifying. All right. So, but let's just back up a little bit. What did you hear here? Okay. So let's back up. And before I even go into, let me ask you a question, Chris. Have you ever been pulled over by the police for whatever reason?
Oh, numerous times.
Numerous times, right?
Numerous times, yeah.
And based on that, based on you being pulled over, what's typically the standard operating procedure?
It's, you know what, I'm going to start at the end and then I'm going to go back. I'm going to do your T, scenario. The T at the end is always survive the situation.
Okay.
My folks always say, man, just come home, survive the situation. It ain't worth whatever you think it is to be tough or whatever the case may be. But it's going to be crazy to those who aren't exposed. And for those who are, it's going to be sadly comical, right? And that is, they pulling you over, you like, damn, okay, I just got buke. You know what I'm saying? They hit you with the lights, you pull over, you roll down your driver's side window, you turn the car off, you take the keys out the ignition when it wasn't pushed to start. You put them jokers on the dashboard and put your hands on the steering wheel. You put your hazard lights on, and by the time they get to you, you're not moving at all. You face forward like we used to have to put our hands together in class on the desk. You give all that type of posture, and then you answer the questions as asked. And if you do those things, you have a higher likelihood of surviving the situation.
Okay. So thanks for sharing that. So let me throw some other things in here, right? Usually the standard operating procedure. So you're what you're explaining is what our parents taught us to do. Okay. Which makes total sense, right?
Yes, sir.
Standard operating procedure, when the police pull you over, black, white, whatever the case may be, they come up and say, excuse me, sir, can I see your driver's license, your proof of insurance, blah, blah, blah. You pull your stuff out, you give it to them. They take a look and say, is it a problem, officer? I pulled you over because you were speeding or you got a tail light out, blah, 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 whatever the issue, right? That's the standard operating procedure, okay? In this situation, that wasn't the standard operating procedure.
At all.
He's at a light. They pull up behind him and snatch him out of the car, right? Now, let's just be fair here. If you're at a light, you're sitting there and then the police come up behind you and run up on you and snatch you out and start throwing you on. Get out the car, and start throwing. First thing you'd be like, what's going on?
What's going on? Get the shovel. Absolutely.
So it was none of that. Okay. So that's what they did. So what did they do? They beat him. They slapped him, pepper spray. They kicked him. Okay. he at the end of that, he was able to get away and he run. Because he's like, I'm just trying to get home. Okay? Now, here's the thing. These are black police officers that did this. Okay? Now, so when we think about it, we're like, well, you know what, Tony? Maybe these were some rogue officers. Maybe these are just a few individuals that, you know, they just go off. They don't epitomize the police force, whatever the case may be. Okay. Possible. I wouldn't, you know, everything's possible. We all, in every walk of life, there's good people, there's bad people, there's good doctors, there's bad doctors, there's good teachers, there's bad. So totally get that, right? So let's play the next clip, because now Tyree Nichols has gone away. He's run away. Okay. And here is another officer, which you're about to listen to. Okay. And let's hear what they say.
He sprayed me too, but luckily it didn't get in my eyes, just on my eyebrow. I hope they stomp his ass. I hope they stomp his ass. Smith is calling for other cars because him and Martin are chasing him.
I hope they stomp his ass? Wait a minute. Stop for a second. Let's back up. Okay? First thing, they snatch him out. They go off. Right? These black police officers. Okay? Black. Okay. Maybe they're rogue. Maybe this is a one-off. This is a white police officer who wasn't even there. He's pulling up, helping the guy, one of the police officers, rinse pepper spray out of his hair. And what does he say? I hope they stomp his ass. Does that sound like protect and serve to you? Well, hold on. Before you, I want you to get to where you want to go.
Okay.
But wait a minute. we're first a few bad apples. Now here's somebody else coming up, and they're saying, I hope they stomp his ass. Okay? Because they're chasing him. Now, here's the kicker. And I want to hear what you want to say, but I'm going to ask you a quick question first.
Yeah, you got it.
When you were a kid and your parents taught you about the police, what did they say to you?
They're your friends. They're here to, assist. And
they did? Your parents said that?
Oh, no, my parents said that you don't want no problems with the police. Like, I'm talking about at school. At school when they ask you what you want to be, you say a firefighter.
What did your parents tell you about the police?
Man, be mannerable, be this, be that. Make sure you don't give them no reason. Make sure you don't give them no reason to make you not come home. To
stomp your ass, right?
That's right.
Where'd you grow up?
In Peoria, Illinois.
I grew up, so you grew up in Illinois.
Yep.
I grew up in Detroit. Okay. Yep. My mother told me flat out, you do not run because they will beat your butt. They would. How do we know this?
Yep. Don't give them no problem. Right.
Was there a PTO meeting that all our parents cross country got together and they said, look, let's talk to our kids about it in Utah? Right. No, This is standard operating procedure in the black community. And this is not just a few off. This right here is a culture issue. The officer says, I hope they stomp his ass, who had nothing to do with the initial interaction. Okay? So this is part of the mindset, and this is part of the culture. Okay? That we hope, and people probably listen to this who are people called black, all right? You know what I'm talking about. All right. We've seen this before, right? That they will chase you and they will beat you down. All right. Now, why is that? Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, because you're going to say a point.
Absolutely. And so why is that they chase you? Because you done made them do extra, right? So they feel like they got to get their money's worth now because you done made them do extra work. But the concept is, even when listening to that again, and full disclosure, I've never watched it because my wife said, this is not what you want to see. She knew how we grew up. And she was like, you don't want to see this. Right. So the audio is as far as I've gotten because I got hurt playing football years ago. And so when an injury happens on TV, I have to turn away because of the PTSD that you talked about. It's like, I can't even see it. In the concept of this, even when you listen to it, and I would invite for you all to go back and listen again, the only aggressive tones, the only primal tones that you hear are from the officers. He is very inquisitive in tone. I don't know this brother, But I know from tone, he was extremely, what's going on? He was absolutely not aggressive. He was absolutely not resistant in tone on the clip. You know what I mean? He was asking a lot of questions because he's discombobulated. He's wondering what's happening. And so when that fight or flight instinct kicked in, he didn't have no fight in his words at all. They had all the fight in the world in everything they were saying. And so even with the flight type of situation where he felt like he was boxed in, and any animal, any person that feels boxed in has to make a decision at that point, and that's instinctive. And so, this concept of him being a human being and then them feeling like we got to stomp his ass because we wasn't giving him any resolve to the questions he was asking and the concerns that he was expressing. We didn't owe him anything except this beating and this snatching and this jostling. That was the saddest part listening to that clip again today, was that, man, in this brother's voice, he's saying, what you guys are doing a lot. What's going on? He's extremely articulate. Like, he's not slurring anything. He's not drunk based on the tone. Nothing's like, he's really there's a lot of sympathy that I impart based on him feeling confused as hell,
buddy,
as to what's going on.
And here's the thing, though. Okay, so let's take it to the next level. And we don't have we're gonna play another clip in a second, but from the chief. But let's just break it down here, okay? Because again, we're painting a picture here that we want to dive into, and we're talking culture, okay? So the first officers that jump on him are 4 or 5 of them, okay? And to your point, they're aggressive. They come at him. He's like, what? So you could easily say, well, they're just a bad group of officers, right? Correct. And so you could easily just push them aside and says, they don't represent us, this and that. However, then another officer comes in and says, I hope they're stomped their ass. Okay, I hope they're stomped their ass. Okay, so maybe instead of 5, it's 6. Okay. However, when you go further on, which we don't have the clips and we ask you to look at, right? They catch him. They actually start stomping his ass like the dude said. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Other officers are standing around doing nothing while the beating is going on. No one is trying to stop, say, hey, man, that's enough. Stop. There's none of that, right? After they stomped, they beat him. And it was horrible. He's laying on the ground. Nobody's coming over to give him render first aid. The cops around him, it's probably 20 cops. They're making jokes, okay? And then nobody went and told and dropped a dime on these officers in terms of what happened. The only reason this came out is that he ended up dying, and then they was able to have the video to be able to show it, okay? So wait a minute now. Is this just a few rogue officers?
Be careful, you're about to say something.
This seems like more of a culture thing here, okay? This is a culture thing here. All right, go ahead, buddy. You gonna say something?
No, I was saying you was about to say something, so be careful. You about to offend some folks. My grandma used to always say the first time you got caught stealing ain't the first time you stole. So,
I mean, so thank you. So Evan, and you hit right. This ain't the first time they did this. Okay, let's just be clear here. And this ain't the first time. This ain't just led to just this group of officers. This seems like something that's gone through the entire organization. Let's listen to the what's her name, Chief Sarah Lynn Davis.
These officers were found to be directly responsible for the physical abuse of Mr. Nichols. Concurrent within that investigation, other MPD officers are still under investigation for department policy violations. This is not just a professional failing. This is a failing of basic humanity toward another individual. This incident was heinous, reckless, and inhumane.
Did that sound like protect and serve? Okay. Think in the last part, this was not humane. Okay. How could somebody, a group of people who volunteer to become a servant of the community, to help the community, protect them, and then end up treating individuals like dogs, like they're not human? They don't have a family. They don't have a soul. How does that happen? Okay? And for us to be able to dive into that, we got to back all the way up, because those officers on that night that they did that, that wasn't just like, oh, Eureka, this is something that's been going on for centuries in the Black community. This is something that you just got finished talking about, your experiences, my experiences. People all across the country, mothers talk about how they sit their kids down, their sons, their daughters, and have the talk about police. Why is that? Because this is something we've been dealing with, not in 2023, not in 2020, not in 1990, not in 75, not in 55 when they came up with the motto. Okay, not in 1910. It goes back centuries, and we're going to share that with you, because when we talk systemic, this is what we're talking about. Okay, these are not just individuals. This is a culture that's been around in how they treat African American people here in the United States, and not only that, how they see them as not being humane. Before we move on and get to the history, go ahead, Chris.
What I want to say, just to be clear, I think that the term, and I know what you meant, but I want to clarify it for our audience. People treat dogs better than this. People treat dogs like family, so they didn't beat him, and I know it's an old statement or whatever it can be, but it was a lack of empathy for any living creature, a lack of compassion for anything that walks around. You want to be compassionate in all walks of life, especially if you're in a position where you interact. Your job is interacting with others. If you don't have that compassion, if you don't have that mindset, if you don't have that type of generosity in you, you shouldn't do this probably. And I think we'll uncover a lot of this, but the idea of even having people in this role that can't sustain that type of mentality is a problem. To have the gung-ho kind of, people that come in hyper-aggressive, hyperactive, that type of deal, the race, whatever the case may be, whatever shortcomings they may have, I understand they're human beings, but you have to be more selective in the people who are designated to interact with people. And I can tell you this, it's dogs on the police force. They don't treat them like that. It's you know what I'm saying? The canines are cops.
That's so true. That's so true.
So it's a lot of that goes on. But yeah, we'll definitely get into it. It's going to be a wonderful journey. Let's just keep it moving.
So let's keep it going. And thanks for that clarification. And buddy, you just hit around the head. There's dogs on the police force they don't treat that way. Okay. Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to back up. When did the police department start? Because I think we got to, before we can understand what happened in 2022 or what's happened in 2023, we got to go all the way back to beginning and to understand, how did this come to fruition? Okay. So that's what we're going to do. So number one, we're going to dive into the history of the police community. So let's kick it off, Double A.
Policing in one form or another has existed since colonial days, in the form of night watches, local sheriffs, and militias. But it wasn't until the 19th century that northern cities such as Boston created modern police departments as we would recognize them today. These northern departments were not the first example of a uniformed, publicly funded law enforcement institution in America.
By the time the northern colonies were afoot in the 17th century, the idea of keeping track of the most valuable asset in the United States, that is, enslaved Africans, animated much of what we'd recognize today as law enforcement. Okay, so number one, back 1700, night watchman. That's when it started, more to protect goods and services. And just so we're clear, who you just heard from was Kahil Muhammad, who's a professor of history and race at Harvard University. You might have seen Professor Muhammad on the Netflix documentary 13th, when he talked about the 13th Amendment. He's very well versed into this type of history. And so we're going to be listening to a few of his thoughts and more important, not thoughts, facts
on this issue. So let's just back up again. 1700, it was more about protecting goods and services. The first police departments, like in Boston, New York, they came on the scene in 1844. That was in New York City. Cincinnati, Ohio, 1852. Boston, Philadelphia, 1854. And we can go on and on, right? So, but at the end of the day, the police force, when it first started, was not about protect and serve, okay? And just to be clear, it was I'll take that back. It was kind of about that. It was about protecting the money of
asset
the rich
protection.
people.
It was asset protection, right?
It was their protection. That's just to be clear here, okay? It was about protecting their goods and services, all right? Because people were stealing their property. Okay. And somebody's like, look, we got to have, a government funded force that can protect our goods and services. That's really what it started about. Right. However, it was a little different in the South. Okay. Because we're jumping ahead a little bit. We're saying the 1800s. My friend on the clip just said the first thing started in 1700, which is clear. And, but again, it was about protecting. And I want you to remember this. Protecting goods and services, okay? Because that's what it's about. All right, before we play our next clip, Chris, you want to jump in?
Absolutely. So this goes back to the first station, the first unit or housing for a small, what was called the Night Watch at the time, was the Charleston City Guard in 1750. Mm-hmm. And that was exactly what you were saying. It was citizens deputized and designated to protect the properties of the landowners and the people. Those properties being goods and things of that nature, but also the Africans that were there that they wanted to make sure remained in their place and on their property at nighttime when it was easier for them to move about and do different things they didn't want them to do. And so they deputized these folks to be but the thing that was most interesting about what Mr. Muhammad stated was it still resembles. Now think about this. What else resembles something from 1750 that you can think of off the top of your head? For somebody to say the police force resembles now what was existing in the 1700s says a mouthful to me.
But buddy, you know what? I got to give it to you because I missed that part. And you caught it.
That was the last thing, man.
All right, I love it. See, this is live, not Memorex, okay?
Right.
We're doing this stuff live here, right?
That's right.
So, buddy, you hit it right on the head. Goods and again, we want the audience to recognize goods and services, okay? Goods and services. All right, Double A, let's play our next one.
In the 1700s, the South saw the rise of official salaried slave patrols, whose task was to capture, control, and brutalize enslaved people.
The initial acts that empower slave patrols and militias were acts that basically empowered all white people to surveil and punish all black people.
These slave patrols were required to serve a tour of duty, usually up to a year. Individuals were compensated for their time, but they were also penalized if they did not show up for their required service.
So, just we're moving chronologically, okay? So, 1700 nice watchmen. Now they create slave patrols, okay? So the police now evolve because remember what we talked about. It was about protecting what, Chris?
The property,
goods
assets.
and services,
That's right.
Their property, right? So now it goes to slave patrols. And now slave patrols are making sure that slaves don't escape, okay? They can't read or write. They're making sure that anything that they're not supposed to do, all right, that they're not doing it. And if you ever saw the movie Roots, okay, and this is probably if people can remember, if they ever saw the movie Roots, and when Kunta Kinte, starts running off and then they catch him, those are slave patrols, okay? And then they said they was going to either cut his genitals off or cut his foot off, and they cut his foot off so he wouldn't run. Those were slave patrols, okay? So slave patrols was to keep black people, keep the plantation's owners, goods and services from leaving the plantation, and those goods, that property was slaves.
Let me make a clarification on what the brother said on the clip. He said it was established so that all white people could monitor and accost all black people. I would like to change the word all to any, because I'm not saying that all white people were
Correct.
involved and that all black people was caught and beaten. But the opportunity existed for any white person, as they so desired, to jam up any black person if they wanted to, get down that way. And I think that's a good clarification point, because we don't want to start. That's another pod that we'll do on, making white people feel bad. But I'm giving y'all one of these where, hey, not everybody was getting down like that, but the opportunity absolutely was established from a societal perspective. And these slave patrols, as it related to white males specifically, being drafted in or indoctrinated in to do their time or serve their duty and get compensated for it, made it acceptable, because they weren't necessarily trained, and it wasn't a lot of things going on that made it very official and very professional. It was, I'm gonna give you a gun, I'm gonna give you some type of weapon, and you gonna go out hunting.
Correct.
And just like Tony said earlier, don't make me chase you because you're going to get it worse. It's only going to be so many times where I go out and nothing's going on and I get bored and create something. And so that's the fear and the type of environment that black folks lived under, was that even if I'm not doing anything, they're going to come and accuse me because they just bored, and this is how they get they jollies or whatever the case may be. So, once again, is a lot that goes into this being accepted as a way of life, and that's just the way things are done around here, that happen with a blind eye to humanity in these type of situations.
And the thing about it too is that, was there people that was against that? Absolutely. Was there white people against it? Absolutely. Right. But that was the way of life.
Yep.
Okay. It was the way of life. So that was 200 years ago. Why are you bringing that up today? Because we're going to show you. Okay. But Chris just made a point to that, right? If we got to chase you, we're going to do something extra to you. Okay. And back then, like I said, Kunta Kinte cut off his genitals or cut off his foot. It's no different today. If we got to chase you, we're going to stomp you. Okay. So that didn't just happen in 2023, that thought process.
And let me give a clarification point to the Kunta Kinte thing, that anybody that understands the story. The reason why the genitals were salvaged was because he still could produce other properties for them. So they wanted to make sure they didn't mess with the money. So the owner chose the foot as opposed to the genital, because he could still make other slave babies. So it was an economic decision, not a humane decision.
Economic, and again, property. Now,
that's right.
Look, it was common for the North police to capture and arrest black people who they perceive to be runaway enslaved Africans and return them to their owners who reported them missing. Okay, so this is the thing though. This is in the South. Well, no. Okay, so you could be in the North and be free, but if they think you're a slave, so that same PTSD that we talked about, those people walking around certain cities in the North, they was just as nervous when they came around the police, because they could be pulled over.
Absolutely.
Show me your papers.
Absolutely.
And if you ain't got your papers, you're a slave. And then you're now shipped back. And what was the other book? 13 Years a Slave. If you ever seen that movie, 12 Years a Slave.
12 Years a Slave. Brother got caught slipping.
Read that book. All right. Rewatch the movie. This is exactly what happened to, true story, what happened to my man in New York. Okay. So even in that situation, because the police, the culture was not friendly to black people, even if you were free, because they didn't see you as being humane. Okay. And so just remember, slave patrol's sole purpose was chasing down runaway slaves and preventing slave revolts. Okay. So now let's just keep going. We're going from, what was the first part in the 1700? Watchmen.
Night watch. Yep.
Now we're moving to slave patrol. So night watchman is there to protect the goods. Okay. Can't let nobody steal these goods and property. Move to slave patrols, which is still in the 1700s, just to be fair. Okay. Maybe even 1600s, but it's whatever. And they're there to protect the property, make sure runaway slaves don't get away. And even in the North, they had their own slave patrols that would recapture, or if they thought somebody was a slave, they would capture and send them back. All right,
Let me say something.
Go ahead, buddy.
Let me say something real quick, Tony, though. Think about the psychology of this. A night watch is protecting their property, their neighbor's property, something they have a vested interest in, something that they have to live with every day or that they've helped sow into. A slave patrol is going out, and they have no vested interest in this besides just to do it without emotion, without context, because they can go back to their home and get paid, and they don't have to live with the consequences of what they did out there in them streets. When you're night watching, it's a defensive dynamic. When you're slave patrolling, it's an offensive dynamic.
So I want us to come back to that point, okay? Because there's a parallel there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we're going to come back. So let's bookmark that point, because we're going to come back to it, because there's a parallel there. So remember what you said. Okay, let's remember that. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's keep it moving. Double A.
14th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery except as a punishment for a crime.
The South immediately moves to exploit this loophole by passing a series of crime bills known as black codes, which essentially criminalize all forms of black freedom.
Okay, so now think about it for a second. Now we're in slave patrols, but guess what? Lincoln frees the slaves. Okay, and now the 13th Amendment, he frees them through the Emancipation Proclamation. Then the 13th Amendment, now guess what? They're free. Okay, so I just want to stick a pin here for a second, because I want to dive deeper here before we. So let's just be clear here. The South, their economy, their money was all came from slave labor, free labor, period. Okay? Now, Lincoln frees the slaves. 13th Amendment abolished. These people now don't have to stay on this plantation. They're free. They don't have to work. The South is in tatters because of the Civil War. Okay? It's blown up. Okay? Their economy is done. All right. That economy didn't get built by white people's own sweat and it was by slave labor. Okay. So now it's got to be rebuilt. Okay. So back to our clip. What does the South do? Before I even go there, there's a loophole in the 13th Amendment. Okay. So just to be clear here, there's a loophole. And what was the loophole, Chris?
The loophole was that if you were convicted of a crime or found guilty of a crime, then you actually could be seen as a slave again, or have to be what is called in the concept of convict leasing from the authorities.
So think about that. Okay. So now you're free unless you are deemed a criminal. All right. Now and just a sidebar here. The stereotype for black people is what? What's one of the stereotypes? They're criminals. They're criminals. This is when that started. This is when that started. They wasn't criminals when they were slaves.
Correct.
Okay, they wasn't. But now, because they passed these black codes and says, now, guess what? We need this labor to work our area. So we're going to pass these, what they call vagrancy laws, okay, which they were. So in other words, you're free, but if we see you hanging around, kicking some rocks, we can say you ain't got a job. We can arrest you, give you hard labor. Now you're a criminal, okay? And then not only that, we can force you back to the plantation.
Correct.
Here's the other kicker. They come to Chris and say, Master Jones comes to Chris and says, hey, Chris, we love you to work on our plantation again. I give you $1 a week. And Chris says, no, Master Jones, I'm good. I don't want that $1 a week. Well, now Master Jones can go to the sheriff and says, I offered him a job and he didn't take it. So now that falls under the vagrancy law.
Yep.
So now they come and arrest Chris, okay, and then force him to work on this plantation under bondage. Okay, so these are the things that is happening when they came up with the black codes. And who are they utilizing to enforce the black codes, Chris?
The slave patrol. Slave patrol.
And the local sheriff and all that, right?
The people who graduated from the Slave Patrol Academy.
The people who graduated from the Slave Patrol, right. Now they're the ones continually to enforce, right? These new black code laws to control black people. I'm going to say that again, to control black people. The Slave Patrol was to control black people. 13th Amendment came, they abolished slavery. They came up with other laws utilizing whatever police mechanism that they have, Slave Patrol, sheriff, to control black people for labor. Go ahead, Chris.
Look at the chronology of this, where you go from protecting assets and protecting property to it being a mechanism of control. It still had an economic output, but it went and it morphed from doing what you could to protect your money to actually just supremacy, superiority, and control, domination. That's what it actually started to exemplify, is that not only we need you doing this work, but we also need you doing whatever I say, whenever I say it, and to show that deference or that fear when I come around. To tip your hat and don't look at a white woman in the eye. We're not going to go down that road right now.
We're not going to go there yet. We're not going there.
But it's a lot of things that come out of that from a psychological perspective beyond just the property superiority at this point, or trying to maintain a sense of order, because you always hear that, maintain order. But now it's just an organization of bullying or an organization of trying to keep things in line and keep that level of societal control intact.
There's no question. There's no question, right? And that's the thing. I love the way you said how it morphed, because that's exactly what happened. Morph from property to now morph into controlling black people. Okay. And we're going to keep going with this because it doesn't end. All right. Now, here's the thing. Black people had been slaves since, depending on what you read, but let's say 1619. Okay. Let's just say that. Okay. It's, probably been earlier than that. Some people say 15 something, but let's say 1619. Now it's 1865. So what is that? 136 years, I think it is, right? That, they've been enslaved. Now they're free. Black people was basically saying, well, let's let bygones be bygones. We just want to move on and just live our life and live under the Constitution, and whatever that you are able to prosper, we just going to do our own thing. They didn't want that. No way. They wanted to continue to control them. Okay. And they use the police, Slave Patrol, sheriff at this time to be able to do it. All right. Because we just talked about earlier, some in the North, some of the police departments started 1848, 1852. The 13th Amendment, 1865, 1866, something like that. Right. So they've been around, but still utilizing whatever is in that area to enforce these laws. Let's keep going. Double A.
The new laws effectively re-enslaved those who had just gained their freedom and required new police to take over the former duties of the slave patrols.
When you have black people serving in political offices for the first time, when you have black landowners in abundance, when you have black professionals, there are Reconstruction era judges, the stakes are even higher for this everyday performance of black subservience to white domination. It is the police who will ultimately serve that function of reminding black people, in many cases, their lower status in society.
What we see is that general way of thinking about race and thinking about disorderly people never really changes. It's kind of woven into the DNA. But it's not just because individual police officers are racist. It's because the institution was literally created to make sure that wealthy and powerful people could extract labor.
So what did we say earlier? What did we say? So think about that for a second and look how this morphs. Okay. Even when they're free, we need to control them. In Reconstruction, black people, because they were like, let's let bygones be bygones. We're just going to move on. They start prospering. They became black senators, black congressmen. If anybody, and we're going to do a podcast on it. What is it called? What happened in North Carolina, the Wilmington lie. All right. I mean, it's just insane, right? But we'll get to that another level. So they're growing, okay? And the people didn't want to have that. They couldn't. So now they want to control them and, more importantly, show their superiority. And who are they using to do that, Chris?
The law enforcement. But let's establish something, because we've said this before, but I want to make sure we reiterate this. It's not all inclusive, but it's pervasive. And so even in 1929, there was something called the Rickersham Commission that took the politics out of the police force in hopes that it wouldn't be propagated by people who had certain agendas. But every time the federal government or a larger body would create some type of law or some type of constitutional requirement or whatever the case may be, the local authorities or wherever you may be would come up with these codes or these local type of things that they were able to maintain and sustain, to where it didn't necessarily, it was a caveat. It was a carve out that they were using to legitimize the subservience of Black people still. So no matter what you said, you wasn't talking to them. You know what I mean? You could write as much down as you wanted to, but that didn't apply to me. That was for them, not us. They said we weren't supposed to have slaves, but we'll find a workaround to make sure we don't stop this money or our way, or more importantly, our way of life.
There's no question. Here's the thing, though, too, because I don't want this to be missed. And what's the brother's name?
Chinjarai Kumanika.
Okay, so that was, I can't pronounce his name.
He's an associate professor at Rutgers,
right,
of media, advertising, just the way that we've been brainwashed to think things that he's a Peabody Award winner. And the things that he bring about, I would advise everybody to look him up, because he talks in facts and he talks in registries and all these other things to where you could see, dang, this is really going on. If you stop and think about it with a clear heart and a clear mind, it's indisputable. Some of the things that he's been able to reveal.
There's no question. But I want to get to his last quote, because I don't want that to be missed. And it's something that we said up front when we first kicked this episode off. And he said it. It has nothing to do with individual police. All right. The system, the culture is woven in. Okay. This is when we talk about systemic. It's now part of the way of life. It's beyond one person or two good people or three people changing it or making a difference. They can still be great police officers. They can still put their life on the line. They can still not see race or see everybody as being humane. They can still do all that. But the system, how it was set up, okay, and how it continues to move forward is bigger than these individuals. And this is where we miss it. And this is because typically when we have these uncomfortable conversations, instead of people listening to understand, they listen to defend. Okay. And they go right to the defense. Wait a minute, blah, blah, blah. And what we're saying here, this has nothing to do with, we have family members, friends that are on the police force. Okay. And at the end of the day, but the bottom line is, this is a culture. This is a systemic that's beyond them. All right. Absolutely. And I remember you telling me about a situation with Tyree Nichols. All right. All right. You want to share that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That in full transparency, being candid. So just to piggyback on what you were saying, it's an infested orchard. We can talk about that bad apples as much as we want to, but the whole orchard.
The whole orchard.
The whole orchard is infested. And so just to be clear, this is near and dear to me, and it's kind of a situation where you just can't escape it. So you have to figure out how to mitigate it in your life. I was working in Memphis, and I had an employee, and she came to me one time and she said, hey, I like you. I like what you bring to the situation. I know you're from Illinois and you've had education and things like that. I have a son, and he's aspiring to be a professional. He's in college. He's the president of his fraternity chapter, and I would love for you to mentor him. And I was like, no problem. Let the young brother know my number. Here it is. Let him text me, blah, blah, blah. We developed a relationship, a mentoring relationship, brought him in for lunch. We talked about his goals, dreams, aspirations. He ultimately pursued some different things and was able to finish college and had a plan together, decided he wanted to join the FBI. And I ended up moving away from there back to Dallas, and ultimately stayed in touch And periodically, and then he got on at the police department, local police department in Mississippi, a place called Olive Branch. And I was like, hey, why'd you take that route? And he said, hey, that's how you kind of pay your dues and get your way up in law enforcement, and had a plan, good kid, everything in my purview was right on time. This is who he is as a person. And I supported and applauded everything he was doing. One day I'm at work. Something came across, I think maybe on YouTube or something like that, or whatever the case may be. And I don't really pay a lot of attention to social media, different dynamics. But my wife called me and said, did you hear about what happened in Memphis? I have not. She was like, well, I might be confused, but I think that your guy was one of those guys. And so she gave me the gist of what had happened. And like I said, she said, you're not going to watch it. I don't feel like you should watch it type of situation, but make sure that you're checking in on the people to see if everything is good with them on that end, because there's two sides to every story, blah, blah. At the time, everything is still not exposed and out and things of that nature. And so I'm calling and checking on my folks and making sure everything, what is true and what's media, what's fake news, whatever the case may be. And long story short, he was one of those guys. He is in jail now. He was one of those 5 officers on the Scorpion unit that was part of that heinous act and things of that nature. And it's almost surreal for me. Mm-hmm. Haven't spoken with him, don't know his perspective on it, talked to people around, and wanted to make sure I wasn't the one that was calling and asking a whole bunch of questions, making it uncomfortable. But at the same point in time, human beings are involved. Somebody's life was lost. I'm very sensitive to that, very cognizant of that. It doesn't make it worse that it was black on black. It wouldn't have made it no better for me if white dudes had killed this brother.
Right.
The loss of life and the way in which it was taken was heinous regardless.
Right.
It could have, no matter what. You paint the picture, you change the narrative. We shouldn't be operating this way. And that's why it's important to me to understand and peel back the layers of, how did this kid but do this? Not necessarily become this guy, because I don't want to cast aspersions on his whole life and everything like that because of the makeup. But he had invested in himself. This wasn't like you said, a rogue agent. He had invested in his career. He had invested in his education. He was a good son. He was a good citizen. He was, giving back to the community in many ways. But for whatever reason, something pervasive in that system infected the orchard.
Right.
And so that's my personal, perspective on it. It's still tough. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be what it is. But until we can figure out why this didn't happen in an isolated, if this was the only time, remember, we're talking about George Floyd. Remember, a lot of this has gone on. I've seen it physically, like with my own 2 eyes, two eyeballs. Same here. But them cameras, the advent of that video and that download and that freedom of information, type of situation is why it seems to be rampant. To a lot of us, this is a Tuesday.
Seen it a million times.
Yeah.
A million times, right?
And that's tough. But it's tough.
Well, here's the thing, though, man. So number one, I know that was tough to share. So I appreciate that. And but the thing is, what you said about the kid, right? That he was a good kid, that he had huge aspirations. You mentored him, right? You would have known if you would have saw any type of those aggressive, non-human, self-centered individual, right? You would have said, this kid's going to have some problems, blah, blah. Yeah. He wasn't that way. Okay. No. And so again, look, we can't sit here and say this did this to him, but what we're talking about is that, and not just in this issue, in this situation, but we know, even some of my friends who are police officers, that at the end of the day, when you become a police officer, you're not black, you're not white, you're not Mexican, you're blue.
Blue, bleed the blue.
Okay?
Yep.
You bleed blue. Okay. And that's now what you belong to. That's the culture that you are now. And so, and to be fair, that can happen to anybody. All right. And this is why we wanted to go through this history, because here's the kicker. This ain't, and we said it a million times. This is systemic. And once you get involved, you get ringed around, and the next thing you know, you're doing stuff that you would not do, or you're seeing things that you never saw before, or you're acting a certain way that goes against your character. Okay. And that's in anything that's bigger than you as an individual. Go ahead, buddy.
Let me help the legal nerds and the regular folks. You're more likely to work out when you have a partner, right?
Right.
The law is deemed greater punishment to those who are involved in a conspiracy.
Correct.
Because when you're in a conspiracy, you're more likely to make sure that whatever you're doing that's illicit is carried out because people have peer pressure that allows for them to act against maybe their base nature. So if you and I are going to do something wrong, it's me, you, double A, and a couple of guys. The fact that one person is dead set on it inclines the others to follow through with it. And therefore the law, the written law, established law, carries a higher sentence for conspiracy because of that. We know this. This is a known. So
Correct.
when we talk about these things, it's not just us saying stuff. It's understood that when you have a group of folks that are cheering on or absorbing or absolving people for certain acts, they're more likely to continue and commit said acts.
Well, and let's add the other layer to that. They have a mentality of us versus them.
Absolutely.
Okay. And when you have that mentality there, you can't see 9 times you don't see the humanity in somebody else.
Absolutely.
You're just thinking about look at what they make us do. Look at all the things we got to go through. So it's us versus them. And you can easily, and we've seen it a million times, but let's just keep moving. So 1700 night watchmen, slave patrols. Now we're dealing with black codes, right? Yep. Now it's moving. We're going to control them, and we're going to use the police to do it. Double A, play the next clip.
During the Reconstruction era, black codes were enacted with the quickness, and they restricted how black folks could live their lives. David A. Harris is a law professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Harris specializes in law enforcement and race, so black people's relationship with law enforcement changed after emancipation.
Law enforcement often was cast in the role of enforcing Jim Crow laws and other kinds of laws aimed at maintaining the racial caste system and at keeping black people, quote, in their place. So law enforcement, to the extent it existed, would be one thing for white people and another entirely for black people. It was aimed at maintaining the racial separation that existed in their system of racial privilege for whites and second-class, at best, citizenship for blacks. And this didn't only exist in the South. There were certainly law enforcement efforts that did the same thing in northern city towns.
But as you can see, that it was set up. Segregation now comes, and now is the law of the land. Mm-hmm. And now, to your point when you were talking about earlier about how the local, federal can say do this and that, but now the local municipalities are now coming up with now Jim Crow. All right, so we're moving from slave patrols to black codes and now Jim Crow, where you can't drink at the water fountain, can't ride the bus, you can't, if all these things now, and who do they utilize to enforce these laws? The police department. Right. And then, as my man just got finished saying, you have one law for whites. I mean, you have one experience for blacks and another experience for white people. OK. And at the end of the day, it's continuing that same cycle. OK, going back to your infested
orchard.
Orchard. Right. Yeah. It doesn't change now. So there's the relationship. There's not, hey, Mr. Reed, how you doing? How's everything going? There's none of that. That continual cycle of controlling black people and using the police force to be able to do it still continues. All right. And here's the thing, though, that's very important here. It's not just in the South.
Nope.
Okay. It's in the North as well, as he just got finished articulating. Okay, in the North, and they would use the police to continue to control black people, even though they didn't have Jim Crow, where, like I said, you couldn't sit on the bus, you couldn't drink from the water fountain. But more importantly, they used it to control, over police in their neighborhoods, terrorize, right? Just more important that we can just pick you up and take you away and nobody would say nothing. Okay, just the thought process. This is where that PTSD, but it comes back even further than that. Go ahead, Chris.
So let me, man, I'm gonna offend some people here, so hold on to your seats. Beyond the demonization of black folks, let's just look for a moment at parenting. Okay, so as a parent, My job is to raise my children, expose them things, and hope that they flourish. My job is to protect and serve my children. Okay? Pun intended. Here's the situation. If I was only a disciplinarian, if I was only being utilized as the disciplinary arm of law enforcement or the justice system, then everything looks like a nail when you're a hammer. You get me? And the fact is, a lot of this morphing that you talked about, if you stair-step that in your mind from the Night Watch to the Save Patrol to the Black Codes to the Jim Crows, now the police are a disciplinary force. They are utilized to discipline and maintain order. And so now everybody's bad to the police, or at least we are seen as the police is out there looking for bad guys, because that's all police can do and do is look for bad guys and chase people down and discipline and catch. And so now the protect and serve, how did that get into the psyche when all you ever did was chase and catch? All you ever did was discipline. You were the one that they called when I sat at the wrong bar or drank out the wrong fountain. They called you to come get me.
Right.
The police were called to come and intervene to discipline these people that we need to keep
you off the bus, right?
That's
You don't want to give up your seat for a white person. They're called to get you off the bus, right?
Yep.
And
they're
so
the disciplinary arm.
They're
Absolutely.
the disciplinary arm. And you know what was funny though, buddy? I'm glad you brought that up. Is not at the end of the day, there is no relationship.
Yep.
It's because it wasn't meant for. It was never built that way.
Correct.
All right. And then let's back up a little bit, because then when you start throwing the racial stereotype of criminal,
yep,
now they justify it.
Yep.
In terms of, to your point, coming in, chasing, disciplinary, whatever the case may be, because, that loophole in the 13th Amendment that, hey, everybody's free unless they're a criminal. Correct. Right. And they use that to control black people, and they still use that to be able to say this force was justified.
Absolutely.
Double A, let's keep moving.
The system of racism wasn't just upheld by law enforcement. Vigilante groups like the Ku Klux Klan played a massive role in terrorizing black communities with lynchings and other forms of violence.
You would find many powerful and prominent people to have been members of the KKK, including law enforcement. You would think today nobody in law enforcement would want to be out front as a member of the KKK. Of course, you wouldn't see that. But in those days, it was acceptable for many kinds of leading citizens to be involved, and law enforcement was no exception.
So for the most part, it was the responsibility of the police to uphold the law of the land, which in the South meant enforcing segregation.
So so think about this for a second. You have the police that you're frightened of, right? Because they've come in, and anytime you saw them, it was a bad thing. But now some of the upstanding citizens in the community, the mayor, the councilman, as well as the police sheriff or police commissioner, whatever, they're part of the Ku Klux Klan, and they utilize them to do what? Control black people. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the Ku Klux Klan, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the history of the police. But the reason we wanted to bring that in is because sometimes they were interwoven together.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And let me say this. A vigilante is someone who acts outside of the confines of the law. So think about it like this. I get jammed up by the official police, and I get off because of me being legally correct. But if they don't like me, or they don't like the fact that I got off, or they're trying to prove a point, they'll just activate the vigilante arm outside of the law to get their pound of flesh, to get their quote unquote justice in that regard. And as you can see, if you understand Southern history, a lot of that became more and more, we don't even care if they get convicted in the court. We don't even care if they go to jail, because we're going to get them on the other end regardless. And hunting parties and all these other things were concocted. Like you said, it's a whole nother episode about the Ku Klux Klan and other functions and fraternities and things like that abided by these rules. But the fact is, when you have people that unmasked were proud members were proud card-bearing, dues-paying members of groups like this, and it was okay. That lets you know that we had something bad going on because you bring who you are to your job.
Exactly. And so, the question that we started this podcast with, Tony, Chris, why is there an adversarial relationship between the police and people of color? Because it was set up that way from the get-go, and it never changed, okay? Because it's systemic. As we just walked you through the history, and we just went to the 60s, but it continues in the 70s, and they, when you hear law and order, okay, that's a dog whistle to speak to exactly what we're talking about here. All right. President Nixon used that in 1970. We got to have law. That's basically code word. We got to put these black people in their place. Right. And they've always utilized police. So there's a ton of people, black people, who are listening to this podcast, who may not, who are walking the street. And guess what? They have a million stories. There's black judges that have. And here's the thing. And this is what I thought. I thought that, you know what, if I work my way up and I get to a certain level of standing in the community, that will supersede all the other things that you deal with. And it doesn't. Okay. There's been judges that's been black, that's been pulled over. Okay. Driving while black.
Yes, right.
Okay. There's been people who's been, and I still want to keep it to the police because we can talk about, people being racially profiled, all that. Right. But my point is, this is not because of individuals. Sometimes it is, to be fair, but this is a culture that has been built centuries ago, and that continued no matter what the circumstances in the United States. As those circumstances changed, they changed their tactics to keep controlling black people. Okay.
The crazy part about it is, Tony, some of the tactics changed, but a lot of them did not. And the uniforms and all that came about for you to differentiate you from them and the us versus them. But if we stop back and think, during the slave patrols, they used hunting dogs to hunt down people. And the dogs were a menacing force that they utilized to prey on black people, whether they was running or whatever the case may be. Think about the civil rights movement and all those pictures with the fire hoses and the dogs that they're using to attack people and that's resonated. That's 100 years later. That's 150 years later. They're still using the same tactics, terminologies, things of that nature, because they still see us the same.
They still see us the same. I totally agree, buddy. And that's unfortunate, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things, though, that we wanted to share, why we wanted to share this, because is it comfortable talking about this? No. Does Chris and I, we got nothing else to do, so let's just talk about it? No. The thing is, we wanted to help change things. And the way you change things is by making people aware of how this thing started. And a lot of times when these things kick off in 2023 or 2020 or 2015 or whatever the case may be, we're thinking that it started then. It didn't. It's just a continued cycle. And so my white brothers and sisters, and I know some of them understand this because, but for those that don't, I hope today that you understand that this is not something for a few bad apples. Are there bad apples? Absolutely. That's in anything. But this is a cultural thing. This is a systemic thing. So real quick before we end, let's talk about some ideas in terms of solutions. Okay. And Chris, you spoke to it a little bit earlier, right? When you said, hey, if you're hiring somebody that's stressed out, all right, and they're, then maybe they're not the right individual, right? So what are we doing in terms of evaluation from a testing standpoint? So Double A, let's keep moving. Let's play our final clip. Talk about intervention.
The history does is it allows us to decouple the idea of public safety from the idea of police. What actually protects women from rape and from sexual assault, right? What actually stops people in communities, both black and white, from killing each other? What kinds of things actually help people who are mentally ill? Are those things police? And I think very quickly, once you reflect on that, you realize the answer is no. We have to stop saying police are broken. We have to say police are working, and we need to create another institution to do public safety.
And you know what? I love what my man said, right? First, you got to understand the history. Okay? And number two, and we're going to talk about some possible solutions here. So some things that they can start activating. Number one is that a lot of the issues that come up are those things. Are we putting the police in the right position to succeed by having them go to somebody's house because the brother or the mother or the sister has a mental illness and, you know, they're acting erratically? I don't think the police need to be doing that.
Right.
Okay. And just to be clear, I don't believe in defunding the police. That's dumb. To me, that's stupid. Okay. We need the police. What we need is the best police force that looks at all human beings as equal. Okay. And that who live up to the motto as protect and the motto that they have, protect and to serve.
So I think that for us, we have to see how the community views the police versus how the police view the community. I think that one of the things that we miss the mark on is the concept that we see them as they are intended, and they have to make sure that they meet us where we are, because if we're the customer, not that the customer is always right, but you have to at least care about what the customer thinks, right? And that's where that protect and serve, whose interest are you protecting and serving? And that has to be established and reinforced all the time. Another thing is that the trust and the brokenness type of situation, I think it needs to be redefined. I think policing should be redefined or at least defined. What are we actually protecting and serving? What are we doing? What do we feel our job is versus what you feel our job is? Because in many communities throughout this country, police are viewed as an occupational force. Just like overseas in the military, I know you're a military veteran. Police are viewed as an occupational force where they have to level up and have the best guns and the best tanks and the best this, and they have to make sure that they keep you in check and in your section and occupy you there to where you feel like there is no escape because I have to live in this confine of society. And unfortunately, when we talk about them being the disciplinarian, that's how I saw it growing up. They come when things go bad. They never come when things are good. They're never there to help move things along. It's only when, you know what I mean, things are bad. And like I said, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you're constructing a police officer as you have to go in and maintain order, and you have to make sure that they understand and they do this, they do that, they do this, that's what you're going with them. You get all hopped up on that rhetoric, and then you release them out into the street for them to get it off somewhere. You know what I mean? And that becomes part of the issue as well. And so I do think that we have to put a concerted effort into establishing some type of dialogue. And people talk about that all the time. But if you don't live or grow up or have some type of frame of mind, remember I talked about the patrols versus the night watch, where the patrols lived there. I'm sorry, the night watch, excuse me. The night watch lived there and were protecting their quote unquote community. They were protecting their goods and services. Where the patrols would go somewhere else, where they didn't have a vested interest or a concern or could care less about what happened because they're what their people in their community. I think a lot of our issues that we've had occur come from police that's not from there, that don't, really embed themselves in these communities. And so they're acting with deniability or a lack of emotion invested.
So number one, I agree with that. Let me say this. I'm gonna bullet point this real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So my solution is this. Number one, because a lot of these, especially in the bigger cities and stuff, the head of police, you have black police commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you still have the same issues,
mm-hmm.
right? Still the cultural, the systemic stuff. And to be honest, they're aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They know. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you have to do is recognize that you have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I haven't heard that. I haven't heard somebody say, you know what, this goes back centuries. This is systemic. There's been a culture in terms of, even before I got here, how blah, blah, blah is treating, how the police have treating people of color. And so first we got to, and you may not have a solution yet, but first just say that, right? That it's a systemic issue. Then number two, part of that is this, we talked about they bleed blue. Okay. This blue code. Okay. That has to be, and I get it. This is my buddy. She's got my back. We protect each other. If she does something wrong, I'm not going to tell. I get all that. Don't get me wrong. I was in the Army. I get it. But at the end of the day, you got to break that, because if your buddy or somebody, it's not even your buddy, somebody in the force, you got to speak up on it. Because if you're really about the slogan, protect and serve, then you're going to do that regardless. So sometimes we got to get rid of this us versus them. They have to be willing to have peer intervention, all right, in terms of being able to rat out or root out these individuals that continue to permeate that culture, okay? Hold on one second. Let me just say this.
You got it.
Okay? And then, so that's number two. And then number three, you talked about the trust issue, okay? There is a trust, okay? A lack of trust, right? Where Black people, and look, Hispanic people, we don't feel like they have our best interests at heart. They don't come to de-escalate a situation. They come to escalate a situation. So to be able to have that relationship with those communities, you need to sit down, look them in the eye, and go back to what I was going to say. We have a problem, okay? And the problem is not Officer Jones or Officer Jennings. We have a systemic problem that we're going to work on and fix by each individual. But the only way we can do that is by building a bridge with the local community. Because look, you can say anything, but it's not what you say, it's what you do. And so for our generation, we may be already, that PTSD may be already gone. But for the next generation, they should be trying to build this bridge in terms of, number one, admitting their challenges. Number two, peer intervention. You guys got to look, at the end of the day, you see somebody do like these Tyree Nichols, somebody's got to drop a dime. We shouldn't have to worry about looking at cameras to figure it out, right? And then number three, build that honest commitment with the local community. Be there with them. Be transparent when stuff goes wrong. Stuff will go wrong. Tell the truth. Be honest, right? And it'll take some time, but it can be done.
So to put a pin from my perspective in this, you stair-stepped us through the history. And unfortunately, you said something that stuck with me, which is the rebranding. And I think that might be part of the problem, is that we've rebranded in naming convention alone, but not in action. Let me take you through the synopsis here. We had the Night Watch. It got rebranded to the slave patrols. They got rebranded to the Black Codes. They got rebranded to the Jim Crow, that then got rebranded to the Blue Codes, to which we're living in now. So yes, we rebranded in naming convention, but the actions are so similar. And the fact is, I'm not here to condemn the job. I'm not here to condemn the thought process or the genesis of why it's important. What I am here is to help you understand, every time there's been civil unrest, every time there's been protest, it was based on the accountability of the actions or lack thereof. It was based on something was done and there was no true and equitable accountability for these people when they did something that was clearly wrong, clearly against what us as humans would expect from somebody in a responsible position. And that type of accountability needs to happen for us to feel like justice is being served on all ends. You being the disciplinarian and the arbiter, but not having to abide by the same rules and regulations and laws and constitution is always going to be the biggest problem any upstanding, bright citizen has, black, white, or anything.
So let's say this one last thing. So you said accountability, which I agree with. And so let's give some examples here. So this was an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal on January 12th. 2024. The highlight, airline industry is flying, airline industry in America has never been safer. Okay? It starts off. U.S. commercial airlines have now gone nearly 15 years without a fatal crash, which is a miracle itself. When you think about 100 million flights and 10 billion passengers since that time. Now, here's the kicker. The reckoning began after a series of accidents in 1990, when the airline officials found themselves staring at a disturbing math. And this is what the math said. If the accident rates remain the same while global passenger traffic continues to grow, we would have at least one major accident a week by 2015. So think about that, okay? People would die. People were dying. And the way it was set up, if they didn't change stuff, they would have major accidents, at least one a week by 2013. All right? Here's the thing. So what they did is they came up with a new system that was totally, what did they say here? It was totally radical. And it took the pilots by surprise. What they wanted them to do was to voluntarily admit when they got things wrong. All right, we talk about that peer intervention. Now, pilots weren't exactly in the habit of disclosing errors and didn't lead to that didn't lead to accidents or serious incidents. Why is that? Because they had an incentive to conceal their mistakes because they could get fired, they can get sued, whatever the case may be, right? However, what they did is they made the self-reporting program non-punitive. So if you say, hey, you know what, I messed up here, this and that, you know what happened? And my man says, he said, you want me to tell 50,000 pilots that they're going to be able to rat themselves out and not be in trouble? You think they're going to buy that? Guess what? They did. And since then, the accident rate fell by 83% over the next decade and made the American system model for the rest of the world. So by them just saying, hey, look, I made a mistake, and they just self-reported, they brought down the accident rate by, it's the safest in the world. So if you apply that same logic to when we talk about our police force, that to your point where we at this next level, you know, the blue, when you bleed blue, if we can get them on a non-punitive situation where they, hey, look, if you see somebody doing something wrong, you got to say what time it is. And they buy into it. A lot of these issues that we're talking about, buddy, would definitely drastically decrease.
I agree.
So listen, buddy, I mean, we went the gamut. You were going to say something real quick?
I was just going to say, quis custodiet ipsos custudet, and that's Latin for who will guard the guardians. They have to guard themselves.
Exactly. There's no 100%. So, Chris, final thoughts, man, because this was a long one, but it was a great one.
I mean, but you know, I think that anything worth doing is worth doing right, and sometimes it's not going to be as comfortable as you would like for it to be, but that's where the needle gets moved, right? Right. Nothing grows in a comfort zone. Get me? And so the idea of growth and expansion, exposure expands expectations, and I think that our desire to give this exposure to people will expand their expectations of what is right, what is just, and what is valuable for us as a society, because we could keep doing the same thing and get the same results.
Exactly.
And that seems to be the path that we've been on for a very long time. But at some point in time, you have to put up a mirror to yourself and to society and say, is this what we want to look like? Is this who we want to be? And if the answer is yes, then just be candid about it and say, yes, I don't have no problem with it. But if you feel for your fellow human being and you feel for the nature of where this country is headed or where this country should be already, then you need to invest. You need to make sure that you're doing your small part to make sure that you stand up and, like you said, be accountable for the fact that I don't want this to be a reflection of who I am or who I want my children or grandchildren to be or grow up under. And it can't just be us against them, and it can't be a white against black. It has to be an American agenda to make sure that we ratify first the policing and the way police are performed and defining the police as currently constructed. And then we'll get into the other conversations about the criminal justice system, because I'm not going to let us off the hook for that.
No, we're going to definitely come back. Number one, amen, my brother. I totally agree with everything you said. And hopefully we answered your questions today in terms of that adversarial relationship, why. And hopefully you walked away today and learned the history of that relationship, as Chris articulated a few minutes ago, from Night Watchman all the way up to Bleed Blue. So our goal here is to continue to bring these uncomfortable conversations, make everybody aware, but not to finger point or whatever. Back to what Chris just got finished saying, is to make our country a lot better for everyone. And we can do that. However, we have to know what's going on and we have to get involved. So we want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast. I think it's time now for what?
Tony's Tidbit.
It's Tony's Tidbit, right? And based on what we walked through today, the tidbit today is by Maya Angelou. And she says, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And that's basically what we were talking about today here. So thank you, Maya Angelou. And I want to thank my boy, Chris Reed, who came and dropped the knowledge on us today. I love him a lot. That's my man. My man, Double A, who works behind the mirrors and the glass to bring all this together and make it very informative. And I want to thank you for investing your time to come in and listen to us in another episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast. And we ask you to continue to subscribe. We want to share this. So it's important that you subscribe to our podcast wherever you get our podcasts. And you can follow us on all our social channels, X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, at Tony Tidbit, BEP. We love you a lot. We talked about it, and we're out.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tony Tidbit, a Black Executive Perspective, and for joining in today's conversation. With every story we share, every conversation we foster, and every barrier we address, we can ignite the sparks that bring about lasting change. And this carries us one step closer to transforming the face of corporate America. If today's episode resonated with you, consider subscribing and leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Share this episode with your circle, and with your support, we can reach more people and tell more stories.